All right, good afternoon. This morning here in New York, the Secretary General spoke at the opening of the high-level meeting to appraise the UN Global Plan of Action to combat trafficking in persons and urge countries to increase their determination to combat this menace, which primarily affects the vulnerable and marginalized people. Too often, human traffickers operate with impunity and receive much less attention than drug traffickers, the Secretary General said. He added that getting rid of this abominable practice will require greater international cooperation, stepping up efforts to raise awareness about the issue, addressing the root causes like poverty and inequality, strengthening support networks for victims, and ensuring refugees and migrants who are particularly vulnerable have access to legal and safe migration channels. The Security Council this morning held a meeting on aviation security, during which it heard a briefing from Liu Fang, the Secretary General of the International Civil Aviation Organization. This afternoon at 3 p.m., the Emergency Relief Coordinator, Mark Lawcock, will give his first briefing to the Security Council as Emergency Relief Coordinator to discuss the humanitarian situation in Syria. And on that subject, we continue to be deeply concerned for the safety and protection of over 1 million people in Deir ez-Zor Governorate, as fighting, airstrikes, and military operations are reportedly causing scores of civilians death and injury. Nearly 100,000 people in Deir ez-Zor have been displaced in the last month. More than 50,000 people have fled in the last week, mainly to other locations in the governorate, as well to the Al-Hasake governorate and to Raqqa. Many have moved to locations difficult for humanitarians to reach due to the presence of Daesh and/or fighting. The UN calls on all the parties to the conflict to facilitate the free, safe, and voluntary movement of civilians. The U.S. also reminds all parties of their obligations to protect civilians, civilian infrastructure, including facilitating access to those in need in a regular, sustained, and impartial manner. And as you will have seen last night, the Secretary General, in a tweet, welcomed Saudi Arabia's decision to lift the ban on women drivers. He called it an important step in the right direction. And wanted to give you an update on the situation of cholera in Yemen. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that as of the 25th of this September, 2 days ago, there were nearly 740,000 suspected cholera cases in Yemen, and more than 2,100 associated deaths have been recorded. Children account for more than half of these cases. Aid workers have set up 250 diarrhea treatment centers, and the UN and its partners have trained over 600 health workers. Today, 27 tons of supplies to treat 300,000 people were airlifted into Yemen. And I was asked earlier by one of your colleagues, the Secretary General's reaction to the mass execution of 42 prisoners that took place in Iraq earlier a few days ago. I think they took place on Sunday, and I can tell you that the Secretary General believes that we cannot neglect the victims of the crimes committed by Daesh and Al-Qaeda and other extremist groups. There needs to be accountability for these crimes. However, the Secretary General has consistently and firmly stood against the use of the death penalty. And there was a similar statement issued by the High Commissioner for Human Rights out of Geneva as well. And our colleagues from the Department of Field Support tell us that 10 new contributors have committed to provide contributions to the trust fund in support of victims of sexual exploitation and abuse. The list of all contributors will be sent out to you shortly. With the most recent contributions, the total amount available to the trust fund from voluntary contributions will rise to approximately $1.5 million. This includes $102,000 that have been made available from withheld payments to troop and police contributors as a result of substantiated allegations of sexual exploitation and abuse. Projects to provide services for victims and to strengthen community-based complaint reception networks will be implemented in the Democratic Republic of the Congo using the funds. Other projects are being identified in the Central African Republic, Liberia, and Haiti. And the High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, spoke to reporters in Geneva today after visiting Bangladesh to see for himself the situation faced by Rohingya refugees who have fled Myanmar. After visiting after visiting makeshift camps in Cox's Bazar, he said he was struck by the extent of the needs of the newly arrived refugees, who said they have absolutely nothing. Mr. Grandi paid tribute to aid workers who are doing what he calls heroic work, but stressed the need that stressed the needs are much greater than what can be actually offered at the moment. And just to confirm that the Secretary General will brief on the situation in Myanmar in the Security Council tomorrow at 3 p.m. That is at least scheduled from our end, but the presidency should confirm that to you. And also on the issue of the Rohingyas, UNHCR says that it's alarmed by an incident yesterday when a shelter outside of Sri Lanka's capital, Colombo, housing Rohingya refugees, mostly women and children, was attacked. 31 refugees were rescued by the Sri Lankan Navy earlier this year. These were the 31 that were in the shelter. UNHCR is grateful to the Sri Lankan authorities for its support and protection of these refugees. The agency is concerned for the safety and security of the shelter staff who are providing assistance to the group. UNHCR urges the public to continue protecting and empathizing with people fleeing prosecution and violence. And regarding the aftermath of the earthquake in Mexico, our colleagues at the UN Development Program tell us they're supporting the government in the southern state of Oaxaca to create a recovery plan to rebuild earthquake-impacted areas and kickstart economic and social recovery. This is an opportunity to lay the foundation for a longer-term recovery and build resilient communities. Building Back Better is part of a long-term strategy to boost skills among affected women and men, involving them in their community's recovery process and aiming to reduce inequalities and leaving no one behind. And the High Commissioner for Refugee, Zeid Ra'ad Al Hussein, yesterday launched an unprecedented set of global standards to support the business community in tackling discrimination against lesbian, gay, bi, trans, and intersex people. The High Commissioner said that social changes requires the active involvement of all parts of society, pointing to the business community in particular. He added that decisions that companies make can have a real and profound impact on human rights. And today is
Tourism Day.
Very good. Very good. World Tourism Day, and the theme is Sustainable Tourism, a tool for development, and it focuses on how sustainable tourism can contribute to the eradication of poverty, protection of the environment, and improve the quality of life, especially in developing countries. The main celebrations for the day are being held in Doha and Qatar. And tomorrow our guest will be the Emergency Relief Coordinator, who will brief you on his visit to Lake Chad, the Lake Chad Basin region, and his recent, which includes visits to Niger and Nigeria. And after we are done here, Mr. Varma will brief on behalf of the PGA. Sherwin.
Steph, is there a reason why we haven't got a more substantive statement on the announcement by Saudi Arabia to allow women to drive?
Well, I think the Secretary General, expressed his sentiment in less than 140 characters yesterday afternoon.
So,
he welcomed the decision. He feels it's a step in the right direction.
can I interrogate that statement a little further?
Can you what?
Can I interrogate that a little?
You can interrogate the statement.
These
you can also ask me a
140
question.
characters.
Yes.
What further action does the Secretary General believe Saudi Arabia should take so that they arrive at the destination that his tweet alludes to?
I think the Secretary believes that whether it's Saudi Arabia or any other country, it is important to continue a momentum to reach equality and to reach the goals that were laid out in the 2030 agenda. Yes, sir.
Yes, on Yemen, you said like supplies and food supply were airlifted over Yemen today. Can you tell me which cities, if you have information?
I don't have the information at hand, but with some luck, somebody may bring it to me.
Yeah, can I have another question?
You may have another question.
Thank you. Yesterday, you mentioned something that there are private diplomacy. When the SG meets dignitaries, you said there are like something you announced, something. remain private. Is it secret? Private diplomacy is a secret one, or
It's not about secret. It's about trying to achieve a goal. Sometimes you achieve that goal by speaking publicly, and sometimes you can achieve that goal by not speaking publicly and having conversations that are more confidential between two parties. I think it's I think it's a those two tools are a bedrock of diplomacy.
when the SG met with the foreign minister of North Korea, I read the statement, the readout, and like in private diplomacy, did he convey any message to the leader of North Korea, like private message or something?
If he did, and I mentioned it would no longer be private. B, I'm not aware that he did. Abdelhamid, then Matthew.
There was a meeting yesterday in Tunisia, I think, led by Ghassan Salame on Libya. So can you do a readout if you have any further information? Thank you.
No, unfortunately, I don't have anything further to add. We go straight to a Periscope question?
Yes, we will, actually. Your comment yesterday about private diplomacy was about the readout on Cameroon. So I wanted to ask you, one of the lines in the readout was, the Secretary General appreciated Cameroon's hospitality toward the refugees. As you may have seen, a study has been issued today by Human Rights Watch saying that Cameroon illegally repatriated 100,000 Nigerians fleeing Boko Haram. Yep. So what exactly was he appreciating?
Well, I think as a general principle, Cameroon has hosted quite a large number of people fleeing Boko Haram. The report by Human Rights Watch was obviously disturbing. We're checking up on it, and we may have more to say on it later.
And by the same token, there's now major publications are documenting the militarization of the Anglophone zone. So I think there's more and more questions arise about this entirely positive readout for a country that's
I think
repatriating people.
We've made our concerns known about the situation in the Anglophone areas. We will continue to do that. We expect Mr. Fall, Lanseni Fall, to go next week to Cameroon.
Could I ask you about Libya? I wanted to just on this. There's a video has emerged of an NGO ship, the Mission Lifeline, being boarded and fired on by the Libyan Coast Guard after they rescued people seeking to flee. So a lot of people are saying it's pretty surprising that the UN hasn't said anything about visual documentation.
I haven't seen the report. I will look into it. Okay. Nizar.
Yeah, was there lift to Yemen via Sana'a or via Aden?
In the maybe 95 seconds that have elapsed between your colleague's question and your question, I have not gotten the update.
Another thing, there was a proposal by Houthis that they would stop firing missiles onto Saudi Arabia in return for stopping of aerial bombardment against Yemen. How does the Secretary General react to such a proposal?
Look, I think what we would like to see is a halt to all the military actions from every side. In Yemen, we'd like to see a return to the table. We'd like to see a political agreement. In the meantime, we would like to see unhindered humanitarian access, whether it's by plane or by boat.
But given there is a rebuttal by the Yemenis to any contact with Sheikh Ahmed, how any mediations or any role by United Nations can be
I think Mr. Ismail Sheikh Ahmed has been speaking to various parties on different sides. Luke, and then we'll go.
What does is he speaking to the Sana'a group?
I think I've answered your question. I've answered my question. I hope I've answered yours as well. Go ahead, Luke.
Thanks. There's a new refugee resettlement plan being proposed by the EU Commission. My specific question is, does the SG think it's positive that direct resettlement from third countries is now being talked about as opposed to just moving people around who are already within the European Union?
I think where the plan was just announced, we're looking into the details. I hope to have a bit more on it for you. Yes.
Thank you, Stéphane. Two questions. First, the tension because of the Kurdish independence referendum is rising between the neighboring countries and the Kurdish regional government. Do you have anything new to say about that? And also, we're seeing airstrikes in Idlib and Aleppo in Syria. And do you have anything on that as well? Thanks.
We're well aware of the rising tensions that we're seeing in Iraq as a result of the referendum and as a result of the vote. We would like to see all the various parties do what they can to dial down that tension. Mr. Abadi.
Thank you, Stéphane.
Oh, sorry. On Syria and Italy, let me. On the airstrikes, no, I do not have anything that I haven't already said. Sorry, Mr. Abadi.
Thank you, Stéphane. You referred to a meeting at the beginning at the high level. Every meeting in the UN is practically described as a high-level meeting. If this is to underline the importance of the meeting, it's actually diminishing it because there is an inflationary trend in using high-level meeting, even though some meetings are not always at high level. Shouldn't the UN look at this matter?
You know, there was, I think, not only system-wide, but all over the place. I think there is an inflation of the use of words. Fewer words. I don't know. Yes is the short answer, Mr. Abadi. I've run out of words to answer your question. Yes, Abdelhamid.
Well, I read a news item that
you're going to bring it down. I know. Yeah.
In the news, something says that there will be a special meeting of the Security Council on November 2nd to commemorate the Balfour Declaration. Can you confirm that? Is there any news that confirm that this?
No, I think you would have to reach out to the presidency that will be in November. I know France is in October. My alphabetical knowledge is limited, so somebody could figure out who's in November.
Okay.
Oui.
Est-ce que vous avez eu un accès humanitaire en Birmanie? Il y a des journalistes qui ont été emmenés dans des villages?
Non. Je sais qu'il y aura un voyage organisé par le gouvernement probablement demain vers Rakhine. C'est un premier pas. Il y aura des chefs d'agence qui vont y participer. Mais nous espérons surtout que c'est, je dirais, un premier pas dans un accès beaucoup plus libre et large dans la zone. What I was saying is that tomorrow the number of heads of UN agencies in Myanmar will participate in a government-sponsored trip to northern Rakhine state. As you know, we have always underscored and stressed our concern about the limited humanitarian access in that area. So we welcome this invitation as a first step, and we do hope that it will lead to much broader and wider humanitarian access. Yes, Mr. Lee.
Sure. I wanted to ask you something about UNMISS. I'd hoped to ask Mr. Shearer it yesterday, but was unable to. What is the UN's understanding of who killed American journalist Christopher Allen a month ago in South Sudan? It said that he was targeted by the government as he was embedded in covering rebel forces. What follow-up has there been by the UN system and the mission in the country?
We should.
Given
you can check with the mission, or we can check with the mission. But
is he still in town? How long was Mr. Shearer in town?
I don't know. On Idlib, I think you'd asked me on Idlib, but I can say that the UN is deeply alarmed by reports of increased fighting and airstrikes in northwest and central Syria, resulting in the death and injury of scores of civilians and damage to critical civilian infrastructure, such as schools, hospitals, and IDP collective centers. Over the past days, airstrikes on populated areas in Idlib were reported daily. Today, airstrikes in Batebo town in northern rural Idlib reportedly hit a school, destroying it completely. The besieged towns of Foa and Kefraya were also reportedly shelled today. On the 26th of September, that means yesterday, shelling on people trying to flee the Wadi al-Zaib area in rural Hama reportedly caused the death of 80 people and injured many more. On the 25th alone, airstrikes reportedly resulted in the deaths of 27 people and injured 58 others in the governorate. Fighting attacks in Deir ez-Zor, Aleppo, Araka, and Iskuta in rural Damascus are also continued to be reported to us. Mr. Lee.
Sure. Thanks a lot. 3 questions. First one has to do with the Global Compact. Until now, the Global Compact has not charged companies for joining, some people have said it's kind of a blue washing that some companies joined, like Englap Sang's firm joined. I wanted to know whether you can confirm or deny that there's a consideration to now charge $10,000 fee for companies to join the Global Compact.
I'm not aware, but you can contact the Global Compact and ask them.
Okay, then I want to ask you about UNIMID. Then you could say, you're going to say call UNIMID, but there's a big complaint by the refugees that internally displaced people in the Kalma camp, where they say that UNIMID has issued a statement after several of them were shot, unarmed, calling for all sides to exercise restraint and talking about clashes when Mr. Bashir visited the camp. Are you aware of that criticism? And what would you?
I'm not personally aware, but it doesn't mean that others are not, and so we'll try to find out.
Okay, and finally I wanted to ask you, there's been a request by Mr. Englap Sang for a new trial in his case, and in the filing that he made yesterday, he actually cites, and I wanted to get your response to a specific comment in his filing. He says that, jumping into it, all of these actions resulted from pressure that Lorenzo and Ash exerted on Yiping Zhu of the Office of South-South Cooperation in exchange for bribes. And that's just a straight statement, a summary of the case. And so I wanted to know, I know that you've said he's not with the UN, but given how it's now portrayed in the case as a fait accompli, shown definitively, what accountability has there been in the UN system? Is Mr. Yiping Zhu still receiving his pension? What attempts were made by the UN to hold him accountable?
He no longer works here. The UN has cooperated fully and actively with all the host country authorities on this trial. No UN staff member that I'm aware has been charged with a crime. We continue, and we will continue to cooperate with the authorities as requested.
Does the UN believe that the activities of Mr. Zhu described in the case were appropriate for UN staff member? And secondarily, I have
no way of verifying the veracity of what you've just read to me.
Has OLA, which stated that they were going to seek to be reimbursed for their role in the case, have they taken any steps in that regard since the verdict in July?
I'm not aware of it. Okay, thank you. And Mr. Varma, sorry, did you have a question? Yes, and then go ahead.
Yes, I have a question about Papua concerns in Indonesia.
Sure, I'm sorry, I don't know who you are. If you could just identify yourself. Yeah.
I'm Tama from the Jakarta Post. I'm visiting here for the GA. And we've received word that there is a petition by Papuan separatists that have allegedly been submitted to the Office of the Secretary General. So I would just like confirmation on whether the office, or you can confirm on that. Thank you.
I will give me your card and I will check as soon as we're done. Thank you.